So let's talk about the future. Nowadays, you see the future everywhere. You see it maybe on billboards and commercials and advertisements. And maybe you see the phrases, create your future, design your future, the future starts now, the future is here. Even the name of this event is called Shape Your Future. But what if I would tell you that how we think about the future is wrong? Because there is not one future. And the future itself does not exist. She only exists in our imagination. And I want to illustrate this by, taking you on a little journey to the year 2070. And if it helps, now don't start thinking about how old you'll be or what you'll look like. That's totally irrelevant. I just want you to come with me on a mind trip to the year 2070. This is a gathering. This is a meeting of people. And I want you to start thinking about how do you think we gather in the year 2070? How do you think people meet in 2070? So if it helps, and I can assure you it does, close your eyes for a second. And then we start counting. 2022, we go to 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060, we're in 2070. And when you look around you, how do you think people in less than 50 years from now gather? And I'd like to get some input from the audience. Just give me some futures. How do people meet in 2070? What do you think? The same, okay? Holograms, fantastic. Anything else? Metaverse. Okay. Heaven. Okay, excellent. So, a couple of what we call probable futures. I asked you, what do you think? What is your prediction? Now, I'm going to ask you to stay in the year 2070, but I want you to dream. What is your desirable future of how people gather and how people meet? What would make you happy? What would you like to see? Nature. Campfires. Face-to-face. Now, you can already see that these futures differ. And I think now we defy the myth that there is one future. Because there are about 200 people in this room. That means there are 200 different futures. 200 different probable futures and 200 different desirable futures. That is already 400 futures just in this room. Yeah? So the future also does not exist. She only exists in our imagination. So now I'm going to give you another future. It's what we call a reframe, an alternative future. That is not probable, it's not desirable, it's not a prediction, just a different one. What if, in 2070, how we meet is through one large collective consciousness, and that we have lost our physical bodies? We are together, we are everywhere all the time. What if? What does gathering and meeting each other mean in that scenario? Think about it. And also think about, how does that make you feel? What questions come up? Maybe you think, well, that's not going to happen. That's kind of weird. Maybe you think, ooh, that's interesting. Maybe you think, oh, I don't like that at all. Whatever you feel or what you're thinking gives you information on what matters to you, what you find important. But it also can give you information on the assumptions you might have about the future, or what you think, what you took for granted, maybe some of your blind spots about the future. Now, what we just did, this little exercise, it's called futures literacy. It's a capability to imagine multiple futures and use those futures to look at the present with a different pair of eyes. Yeah? Now, if the future does not exist, so if she is uncertain at all times, And we cannot eliminate that uncertainty. What we can do is change our attitude towards the futures. And that's what this is about. Now, 2.5 years ago, I did a similar exercise with a hospital somewhere in the Netherlands. And I gave them an alternative scenario. And I said, look, in 2070, we are all living in our own cubicles, like with these little pods. And there's no physical contact between people. We cannot touch each other ever. What does healthcare look like in this scenario? The people at the hospital thought, well, that's not going to happen. What kind of an absurd scenario is this? We cannot touch each other. A couple of months later, COVID happened. And then all of a sudden, that kind of bizarre scenario became eerily familiar. Because, of course, there was a situation that we could not touch each other. And because they had been to that world, they explored that scenario. It wasn't that they were ready or prepared for the pandemic, but it made it easier to talk about what mattered most. Because they had explored a different future. They had explored a different scenario. Now, playing with different futures, exploring unknown territory, can help us to see the present differently. Because about something that does not exist, the future, it has a profound impact on how we think, what we do, and how we act in the present. It has a profound impact on our sense of agency. And if we become too attached to one or two scenarios, we limit that sense of agency. Now, when I encountered this capability, future literacy, it was developed originally at UNESCO. I took it and I made it, I thought I knew what it was, until I really realized how I could use it in my own life. Before COVID, before the pandemic, I traveled a lot. I flew all over the world, talking to people, teaching students. And when Corona hit, I was really worried I wouldn't be able to do my job or to act out my talent. And I thought, if I cannot travel anymore, what's the use? And then I realized, wait a minute, this is another future emerging. This is another reframe scenario that's telling me something about my assumptions about traveling. And then I realized that traveling is not about mobility. It's not about going from A to B. It's about exploration. And maybe it's about going from A to A. And whatever I was looking for or trying to search was already here all along. And that opened me up for different possibilities in the present from my own home. So my message to you is this. There are many, many, many different futures. And you have the power to imagine them. And whenever there's a dominant future or a dominant narrative out there, or you're encountering one, or other people, whether it's adults or school or companies, tell you, this is the future, ask yourself, whose future is this? And then maybe you will realize that it's not about what we do today that shapes your future, but what you look at the future that shapes the present. Thank you.